Welcome back, everyone. I'm Jordan Giesecke, and this is The Limiting Factor. Today I'm going to be covering Tesla's Q3 2022 earnings call from a battery perspective. Tesla gave us a whole lot of insights about where they currently are and where they're headed in the future. As usual, I'm not going to be covering everything in the earnings call, just areas where I think I can add value. Before we begin, a special thanks to all my Patreon supporters. They're the people who make this channel possible. With that, let's get into it. As usual, Elon kicked off the earnings call with some opening remarks. The first thing he said that's worth noting was, quote, "Our production of 4680 cells has tripled in Q3 compared to the previous quarter. We are finally gaining rapid traction on the 4680 cell, and its output is growing rapidly." End quote. Now, this roughly aligns with comments I've made recently, and there was this image that I shared in a recent video. My assumption, based on past advice, was that Tesla would hit a 700 megawatt hour run rate for the second quarter and a 1.6 gigawatt hour run rate for the third quarter. That would mean about a 4 gigawatt hour run rate for the fourth quarter, which would be enough for over 1,000 Model Y packs per week. Now, of course, a few weeks ago, it was reported by Electrified that Tesla is or was currently at a 3 to 4 gigawatt hour run rate. But I'm guessing that was either just a burst rate or may not have included yield losses. The figures that I'm providing here are what I'm expecting from actual average output. It's not a burst rate, and it does include yield losses. Now, I may be wrong here. I'm playing it conservative on purpose, but I think what I'm saying aligns with what Zachary Kirkhorn says later in the earnings call, which is he basically says that they're reaffirming their guidance from last quarter, which is that at some point during the next quarter, they plan on hitting over 1,000 packs per week. Now, if they had already hit 3 to 4 gigawatt hour run rate a few weeks ago, they would already be at that rate. So I don't think the 3 to 4 gigawatt hour rate, that the rumored rate from a few weeks ago, is accurate in terms of final output, but rather number of cells produced, because there's defective cells that show up at different points in the manufacturing process. And there's also, of course, you have to take into account that may have been a burst rate. Elon goes on to say, quote, "We expect the 4680, to be a significant proportion of our production here in Texas in the coming months." End quote. Now, we don't know what he means here by significant, and we also don't know if he means in relative or absolute terms. So my takeaway here is that they expect the 4680 cell to start picking up slack from the 2170. But beyond that, we don't really know more specifically what he's saying here. If he's saying that they expect to be producing more 4680 packs than 2170 packs, or they expect to be producing 25% of the packs or 40% of the packs, 4680. Elon continues, quote, "We also have our second generation of manufacturing equipment for 4680 cells in Texas, which continues to show great progress along with our original pilot line in Fremont." End quote. Now, this doesn't really tell us a whole lot, but it does trigger some thoughts for me. I'm wondering if they're even going to at any point start using the dry electrode process for the cathode in Fremont. As I've shown in my previous teardown of the cell that I got from Galileo Russell, that battery cell used a wet process for the cathode. And I'm expecting that the battery cell I get from Monroe will be the same as well. Now, I don't know at what point that they're going to shift over the cathode to a dry process, but I've heard rumors that they're coating the cathode side at Fremont using a wet process that's stationed there at Cato Road in Fremont. So, yeah, we'll see. Hopefully this is something that they've solved or will be solving with their next generation equipment, and I'm hoping that somebody in a future earnings call will ask that question. Have you solved the dry battery electrode process for the cathode? Because it's pivotal in being able to accelerate the ramp of 4680 production. At this point, Elon moves on to cover vehicle demand in general. Quote, "With respect to demand, we've got a lot of questions about demand in recent weeks. Of the 2 billion cars and trucks on the road, we only have about 3.5 million. So we've got a long way to go to even reach 1% of the global fleet." End quote. In other words, Tesla basically has unlimited demand because at their current run rate of 2 million vehicles a year, To manufacture 2 billion cars, that's 1,000 years worth of production. So, we've got a long way to go. Now, of course, vehicle manufacturing is going to ramp rapidly, and it's not just Tesla that's involved, but it's still going to take about 20 or 30 years to replace all those vehicles. And as long as Tesla can keep driving down costs and get the raw materials they need, they're going to keep expanding, and they're going to take a significant proportion of the market, at least 20 million vehicles a year, as they've suggested, by 2030. But what happens after 2030? We still have to see, because Tesla has so many irons in the fire. I'll be interested to see how their priorities shift around over time. Now, commensurate with Elon's comment about demand, he lobbed this grenade, which was, quote, "I see a potential path for Tesla to be worth more than Apple and Saudi Aramco combined," end quote. Now, for me personally, this wasn't really that much of a grenade, because if you just look at Tesla's past performance and their growth of 50% per year, you look at their current market cap, and their current forward PE is roughly about 30 at this point. If we look 5 years in the future at a 50% growth rate, you're looking at $4 trillion. So it's just an obvious progression of what's happened in the past, so long as Tesla can maintain that growth rate. And even if they don't, they'll eventually hit this market cap not long after that. So yeah, $4 trillion market cap within the next 5 years. It seems like it's totally on the cards. Now, towards the end of Elon's opening remarks, he said this, quote, "And then with respect to batteries, we're moving as fast as possible to achieve 1,000 gigawatt hours a year of production capacity in the United States, vertically integrated, anode, cathode, and refining. We're moving at top speed to do that," end quote. Now, this was one of the most surprising comments of the earnings call for me, and also one of the most important. At Battery Day, Tesla said that they would be consuming or producing about 100 gigawatt hours of cells per year in 2022. Well, now that the dust has settled and we're in 2022, we know that Tesla is probably going to consume about 100 gigawatt hours of cells per year. That means in 2030, that's not 3 terawatt hours of in-house production, that's 3 terawatt hours of cells consumed. Now, what proportion of that will be Tesla in-house production? There's no way to know at this point. I don't think Tesla even knows. But I would say that it's probably going to be at least half. So if we're looking at 1.5 terawatt hours of global in-house production, and Tesla plans on 1 terawatt hour being fully integrated in the U.S., that's a lot of vertically integrated production within the U.S. It's basically saying that in 2030, Tesla is going to own the bulk of the raw materials, refined materials, and battery cell production in the United States. Not a near monopoly, but I do think they're going to have greater than 50% of that infrastructure in the U.S., which is a lot of power in the hands of one company. And it's pretty important considering the significance of energy and energy independence to a country. Tesla's going to be an important part of the national security of the United States. Now, it's also significant because Tesla's not directly challenging China here, but they are basically saying, we can't rely on China for everything. We need to create an alternative supply chain to China's near monopoly on battery materials. If we want to be the masters of our own destiny and have faith in the future of the company, we need our own supply chain outside of China. And I don't see anybody else that's in a position to do that but Tesla. So Tesla is basically going to be delivering a large part of U.S. energy independence from sustainable energy in the next 10, 15, 20 years. Now that we have Elon's opening remarks out of the way, let's move on to the question and answer session. As usual, this started with questions from retail investors. The first question was, quote, "Given the stringent battery content and assembly requirements for consumer tax credit eligibility under the Inflation Reduction Act, can you speak to Tesla's ability to meet those thresholds in each of 2023, 2024, and 2025 through your existing and planned supply chain?" End quote. Elon Musk responds, quote, "Well, yes, we do expect to fully meet the IRA's requirements," end quote. And Zachary Kirkhorn follows up, quote, "We view that the passing of the Inflation Reduction Act is a significant boost towards accelerating our mission, while also scaling the battery supply chain at large in the United States. We also expect Treasury to publish detailed guidance by the end of the year. Until such time, it's difficult to determine the eligibility criteria, but we believe that Tesla is very well positioned to capture a significant share of that for solar storage and also for electric vehicles." End quote. I'm really glad somebody asked this question because it has huge potential to impact Tesla's bottom line. There's two sides of the Inflation Reduction Act that relate to EVs. First is the consumer tax credit. That impacts customers, and it won't impact Tesla because Tesla already has unlimited demand. Now, with regards to the other side of it, that's the manufacturing tax credit. If you want to know more about that, I did a video with Bradford Ferguson on that about 6 to 8 weeks ago. So what most people are interested in on the manufacturing side is there's a $45 per kilowatt hour tax credit for battery packs, $35 for the cells, and $10 for the packaging itself. If you look at just one of Tesla's facilities, Giga Nevada, that's about $1 billion per year. If you look at Tesla 7 years in the future, if they're producing 1,000 gigawatt hours per year, fully vertically integrated in the U.S., you're looking at about $35 billion per year. Now, I don't think that this will actually do a whole lot to accelerate the transition to sustainable energy. I do think it will help bring a lot more battery manufacturing to the U.S. It was more of a geopolitical thing from the people I've talked to who have spoken to people in Washington. Now, that's not to say it won't have any impact on accelerating the transition to sustainable energy, because I think it will. I think the companies that supply Tesla are going to be more likely to take risks. There's going to be no question that they're going to be able to be profitable with these tax credits in place. And I think it will also help or encourage Tesla to take risks. And with those risks, I think will come some acceleration of the supply chain on a global level for Tesla. And more specifically, I think it'll help concentrate that and accelerate it within the U.S. itself. So overall, a positive thing. A lot of people think it's going to do a lot to accelerate the transition to sustainable energy. I find that questionable, and that's not the main reason that this was put into the Inflation Reduction Act. It was mainly geopolitical. But regardless, it has major implications for Tesla, and I'm happy to see it as a Tesla shareholder because that's just pure cream. Tesla didn't ask for this, they didn't need it, but they're going to be getting quite a bit of extra money in their pocket. Now, of course, Tesla said that they're going to have to wait for more clarification from Treasury as to which of these tax credits apply. What they're basically going to do is there's the word of the law, what was written into the legislation, and how they're actually going to interpret that law or the spirit of the law. So what they're going to do is they're going to talk to the people who wrote the legislation, talk to our trading partners, etc., and then they're going to interpret it on that basis. But Tesla seems very confident that people who buy their EVs will be able to apply for that EV tax credit because they're going to meet the local sourcing requirements. And from what I gather, they're also going to be able to collect the manufacturing tax credits. But we'll find more about that, hopefully, at the Q4 earnings call in January. I'll, of course, cover that in my video follow-up, just like I'm doing now. And if there's more to it, and I think there may be, because there's a lot of implications to this, I might actually do a separate video as well. The next retail question was, quote, "How is production planning going for the Cybertruck? What is the initial phase 1 production target? And when can we expect an update on pricing and final design?" End quote. In response to this, the team basically said that the Cybertruck was on track. They repeated previous guidance. But Elon used this as a springboard to talk about the Semi. I think what happened here is this is just, there's many times in the earnings call where just more than one question was asked at once, and they took a shotgun approach, and then Elon and Drew and the team just kind of ended up talking about what they wanted to talk about because it was just kind of question overload. But Elon goes on to say, quote, "There's Tesla Semi, of course. We'll be handing over our first production Tesla Semis to Pepsi on December 1st. There's no sacrifice to cargo capacity, 500-mile range. Just to be clear, 500 miles with cargo. Yes, 500 miles with cargo on level ground, not up." End quote. Let's look at what the significance of what Elon is saying here. He said 500 miles of range on level ground with a full load. Well, in most cases, you're not going to be going uphill for 500 miles with a full load. I don't think most semis all the time are fully loaded. And over the course of 500 miles, there's going to be variations in the terrain. And on top of that, there's not many semi-drivers who are going to be driving 8 hours straight with no brakes. I think after 8 hours of driving, they have to take a 30-minute break anyways. 8 hours of driving is, about 480 miles at typical 60 mile per hour speeds. So it's really going to be the edge cases where Tesla's not going to live up to the spec. And I'm sure there's going to be YouTube videos, or there's going to be reports after the Semi comes out saying that the 500-mile range that was advertised isn't accurate. But what they're going to be doing is they're going to be testing it in circumstances where, of course, it's not going to be able to meet the spec in those specific circumstances. But for most most logistics companies and most use cases, 500 miles of range is going to be more than enough. And over time, bear in mind, this is the first generation Semi. The range will increase over time, especially when they get the 4680 battery cells in the vehicle and they have a chance to refine the structure of the vehicle. So this is going to be, I think in the next 5 years, we can expect the Semi to have 600 miles of range, which comfortably gives it that 500 miles of range with a buffer. But again, that's not really needed. All the FUD around not being able to produce a Semi that can go 500 miles of range or be commercially useful is it's bunk. And the idea that we need hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, it just doesn't make sense. If we do use hydrogen fuel cell semis, it's just going to be a stopgap. And I don't see them, over the next couple of decades, becoming more useful than a battery-powered Semi. One thing I'm wondering, and I haven't heard it discussed anywhere else, maybe it has been, but the fact that the Tesla Semi will basically have two braking systems, the regenerative braking from the electric motors, and then the regular air brakes that a typical truck has. I'm wondering if it's less likely to have runaway truck events that cause loss of human life, property, etc., let alone being a terrifying experience. So hopefully somebody asks this question to Elon on Twitter and he answers at some point, or maybe they'll address it in a later earnings call or at the release of the Tesla Semi. Now, Elon goes on to say, quote, and we'll be ramping up Semi production through next year. We're tentatively aiming for 50,000 units for 2024 for Tesla Semi in North America, and obviously will expand beyond North America, end quote. Now, this is really exciting news due to the implications. A Semi line producing 50,000 units per year will probably use about the same number of battery cells as a Model Y line producing 500,000 units per year. So with all that Tesla has going on, all these concurrent ramps with energy storage, Semi, multiple lines across the globe, it tells us that Tesla has a lot of confidence in their cell supply. It also tells us that they're being very ambitious with the Tesla Semi ramp. 50,000 units, 2024. Now my guess, and I thought it was aggressive, was 100,000 units by 2025. I still think that's aggressive, but I am pleased to hear that they're moving in increments of 50,000. So potentially 50,000 units in North America, and then maybe another 50,000 units in North America, or maybe they'll create another 50,000 unit line in Giga Berlin for Europe. Overall, I think there's something like 1 million large trucks like this produced per year. So there's a massive market for it. And the fact that Tesla Semi is so much cheaper, they can go well above 100,000 units per year and sell every one of them. The next retail question was, quote, what factors determine whether vehicles get 2170s versus 4680 cells? And how will that change over the next year? End quote. Zachary Kirkhorn responds, quote, we really attempt to minimize factory complexity and product changeover while still making sure we get enough new product in the field to learn how it's performing. And that sort of mix is going to shift as 4680 scales here and the overall factory ramp proceeds in Texas. End quote. In other words, Tesla is going to be playing battery Tetris on an ongoing basis. Whatever cell is best for a specific use case, that's what they're going to use. On that note, later in the call, Elon says that the Tesla Semi doesn't use the 4680 battery cell. I'll cover that now because it fits with Zach's comments about minimizing product changeover. In the past, I said the Tesla Semi could use the 2170 battery cell, but I thought the 4680 cell was more likely. That was for a few reasons. First, Elon said as much himself in an earnings call in 2020. He said the Tesla Semi could use the 2170. Second, the initial Semi ramp was expected to occur at Giga Nevada, where 2170 cells are made. So I thought the combination of those two things meant that it was possible that the Semi could use the 2170 battery cell. But I lean towards the 4680 battery cell because it would minimize complexity and changeover in the future when Tesla eventually switches the Semi to the 4680 battery cell, which I do expect the Semi to eventually use the 4680 cell. In other words, may as well start with the 4680 if you're going to continue to use the 4680 in the future. In my view, the least likely cell for the Semi is the 18650 out of Japan. That's because those battery cells are already going all the way from Japan to Fremont. And to then further ship them on to Giga Nevada, it doesn't make sense for me. Tesla tends to localize production as much as possible to reduce costs. I think it would have made more sense for them to produce the Semi in Fremont rather than ship all those cells over to Nevada if they plan on using the 18650 battery cell. Either way, I don't think it matters whether Tesla is currently using the 18650 or 2170 battery cell because, as I said, I think it'll eventually use the 4680 in the future. Additionally, does it really matter which cell the Tesla Semi is using if it gets the range and specs that they advertised? No, it doesn't really matter. Tesla has shown that they can use different types of battery cells for the same vehicle to achieve the same ends, just like they did with LFP and nickel cells in the Model Y and Model 3. At this point, Elon jumps in and he starts making some comments about the 1 terawatt hour of fully vertically integrated cell and battery supply chain within the U.S. And he makes some notes on chemistry. Quote, on the cathode side, we think it will probably be iron. Iron can scale to very, very high tonnage, and then some nickel. The exact percentages are hard to figure out, but it's probably twice as much iron cathodes, maybe more. And then there's the manganese wildcard as well. End quote. There's been some speculation that Tesla's going to get all the iron-based or LFP chemistries they need from China. Now that's something I've disagreed with. What Elon is saying here is that they have very aggressive plans for LFP production in the United States. Whether that's in a 4680 form factor, I don't know, but I'm expecting it to be the 4680 form factor because, if you use a cylindrical cell, it's easier and cheaper to produce. If you use a prismatic cell, it's larger, you get better energy density, but the trade-off is that those cells can be more expensive to produce. It's, putting a jelly roll into a square container and adding tabs to it is just tricky business. Regardless, a 4680 cell would provide enough range for, a Model 3 with 300 miles of range. And of course, Elon mentions manganese as a wild card. Now in the past, I've mentioned a lithium nickel manganese oxide chemistry that's high voltage, but I just don't think that's in the cards. I'm getting overexcited about a future technology. And what's more likely is that Tesla's going to put manganese into an LFP chemistry to increase the voltage and therefore increase energy density. Or what they're talking about here is putting manganese in a high nickel chemistry. That displaces some of the nickel. It allows Tesla to produce more high energy density nickel-based cells for the same amount of nickel. What they've said in the past is roughly 30% manganese and 2/3 nickel. What this isn't referring to is the NMC chemistry that we've recently seen in my teardowns of the 4680. My view is that NMC or nickel manganese cobalt cathode is just a stopgap. It's a relatively high nickel chemistry, but it's not what Tesla has planned for their high nickel chemistries, which I think are going to be 90 to 95% nickel as opposed to roughly 80 to 90% nickel for like a NMC 811 chemistry. So that's the NMC is something that's very different from the high nickel chemistry or the high manganese chemistry that Tesla's talking about. Either way, this bodes well for companies like Mitra Chem or Nano One, who are both making plays in the lithium iron phosphate or iron-based chemistry market in the United States. I don't know if Tesla's going to use either of those companies, but it does signal that there's going to be a lot of iron-based battery cells made outside of China in the future. The next retail question was, quote, When do you see Tesla's third platform being released? And at what level of cost of goods sold reduction could you achieve? End quote. Elon responds, quote, we're on a 2-for-1 target. How do we make 2 cars for the amount of effort that it currently takes us to make 1 Model 3? End quote. At this point, the earnings call was cutting out quite a bit, but from what I gathered from the snippets that did make it through was that they're basically saying that it would be half the cost, half the floor space, and half the effort to produce the vehicle. I could make an entire video speculating about, what the size of the battery pack is, the dimensions of the vehicle, etc., but it might be an exercise in futility because we really don't know what Tesla has planned. For instance, if Tesla decides to go extreme on the Robotaxi front, do we really need it to be a 4-person vehicle? Or could it be a 4-person vehicle where the rear seats fold down to turn into cargo? Because most trips you only need, you only have 1 or 2 people in the car, so you don't need that many seats. If that's the case, this could be quite a small car. But if they're going to go for a compact form factor like a VW Golf, we're looking at, something like, at most, I think 45 kilowatt hours. And of course, this also depends on range. So I think 40 to 45 kilowatt hours is a good guess. But again, there's too many variables to really come up with something that has predictive value. Now, some people might not like the idea of a vehicle that only has like 2 seats, or it's just like a small jelly bean. But another way to look at it is these things are going to be so cheap, roughly 30% of the price of any other form of transportation, that you can order more than one of these. If you have a large group of people, you just kind of order a fleet of Robotaxis. And then there's going to be other vehicles on the fleet, such as Cybertrucks, Model S's, Tesla Model 3s. If you do need something bigger, you'll be able to order that up. But for most people, all you really need is something pretty tiny to get you from point A to point B. I don't know if they're going to be designing this for highway speeds as well. That's another variable. If this isn't designed for highway speeds, then this could be a really lightweight, cheap vehicle to make. And I know that's Sandy Munro's view. I don't share that view. I think maybe they might make something specialized in the future, but I think it limits the utility quite a bit if you're just designing the vehicle for urban or in-town use. The first analyst question is from Adam Jonas, and he asks, quote, so Elon, would you consider vertically integrating into mining? End quote. Elon responds, quote, whatever the limiting factor is, we'll do. If there was a great supplier who's better than us, or even where the economics suggests that we could beat them, but we could use our own resources to do something else that will be more productive, then we would insource in that case. But if we have to mine, we will mine. End quote. If you want to know what Elon's referring to here, at least from my point of view, it's worth watching my Solving the Materials Bottleneck video. In that video, I showed a list of 10 strategic goals or strategic points laid out for Tesla's future. In this image, I expect Tesla will do the first 5 strategy points, but if suppliers can't keep up with Tesla's needs, Tesla will aggressively pursue the second 5 strategy points. The first 5 strategy points are basically low risk, high reward, low effort. And the second strategy points get quite a bit more tricky for Tesla in terms of the amount of time, energy, resources, and risk associated with them. But with that said, I think Tesla will need to get deeper involved in the material supply chain. Right now, they have solid plans to move into cathode and anode production and refining, but further into the supply chain, we'll see. There's some pretty exciting opportunities out there that I've uncovered, and I'll cover that in a future video. I don't know the likelihood of those opportunities, but I see ways that Tesla can source raw materials that wouldn't require as much permitting in certain circumstances. Adam Jonas followed up by saying, with regards to the, quote, 1 terawatt hour of manufacturing in the United States, vertically integrated, what would need to change with U.S. permitting laws to achieve that? Kind of what would be your message to this administration or next? End quote. I'm not going to read Elon's entire response here because it was about 3 paragraphs long, and it basically boiled down to Tesla has been in contacts with people in the U.S. government, and it sounds like there's a lot of positivity around easing restrictions for mining and refining for things related to our sustainable energy future. In addition to that, Elon once again made comments, as he has in the past, about how inefficient the battery material supply chain is, and that it may not cost as much as we'd expect to build a battery material supply chain in the U.S. because there's more streamlined ways of doing it. So if you can streamline it, you can reduce the capital inputs, scale quicker, make it cheaper, etc. Personally, I expect in the future that Tesla's going to have a battery day part 2 or perhaps a mining and refining day, depending on how deep into the material supply chain they get. Because if they do decide to do this, to get really deep into mining and refining, they're going to need a lot more talent. And that means a recruitment drive. And a recruitment drive means a special day devoted to that topic. So we'll see how it all plays out. It's actually in Tesla's best interest if they don't have to do that. But if they do, well, it would follow the pattern. The next question is from Pierre Ferragut. Quote, on the innovation and cost reduction and efficiency improvements that you described at Battery Day, where are we today? And how much time is going to take to deliver all the potential you outlined then? End quote. Drew Baglino responds, quote, at Battery Day, we showed a timeline out to 2026 for all of the ideas we had proposed and had shared with everybody then. End quote. First, two things. This is pretty much the same question that Pierre Ferragut asked at the last earnings call. I recommend that Pierre watches my channel and my teardown so he can see how things are progressing, so he doesn't have to keep asking this question. Now, the cost side of it is good, but that can be inferred because we're at the beginning of the production ramp. We're not going to see major improvements to cost reductions until, next year. They're probably starting to see cost reductions already, but that's something that they already said earlier in the year. So it seems kind of like a redundant question to me. But Drew's response was helpful in giving us a bit more context around Battery Day. And I wish I wish this would have been said during Battery Day, that their overall timeline was 2026. During the Battery Day presentation, they mentioned 18 months, 3 years, but it was in different contexts and different points in the presentation. So we never really got a solid feel for what their timeline actually was. Now, my view after Battery Day was that for at least the lithium refining and mining from clay, that aspect of the presentation, it was going to be at least 2026 before we saw that. And we don't even know if Tesla still plans on doing that. So I think in a couple of years, it would be good for Tesla to give us a comprehensive update on where they stand, besides what they're doing here in the earnings call. Once again, a Battery Day Part 2 would be good. It was also really helpful here that Drew was tempering expectations, and he wasn't necessarily sandbagging. He was giving a realistic estimate of his own view on the situation. Then, of course, Elon jumps in and says, quote, I think we'll do better than that, end quote. Now, as always, I appreciate his optimism, but I'd prefer realistic guidance rather than over-optimistic guidance. Now, there may be some 4D chess here that I'm not aware of. Maybe Elon is using this as a way to motivate employees. In the past, Elon has said that it's like an outgrowth of his natural optimism. But regardless, I am curious, if you work at Tesla or if you have worked at Tesla, do the aggressive public timelines enable, allow, or encourage you to execute more quickly? Let me know in the comments below. Elon follows up by saying, quote, we still feel confident that the 4680 will be the most competitive battery cell in the world, end quote. Now, I agree with that 100%. I'm currently working on a video comparing the CATL Qinglin to the BYD Blade to the Tesla 4680 battery pack. Now, the 10,000-foot view is that they're all excellent next-generation battery packs. I do see that I think the 4680 battery pack has an edge in a couple areas. It all depends on the angle that you're looking at this from, because there's the actual production cost, and then there's, all right, well, how much does it cost a company to buy these cells? Well, Tesla's obviously going to get its own battery cells and packs much cheaper than if they got them from an outside company. So if Tesla has a battery pack that's as good as or slightly better than those battery packs and they're producing it in-house, that's excellent for margins, performance, growth, scaling across the board. After Elon's comment, Drew Baglino jumps in to provide a bit more context, which was helpful. Quote, it's the whole system around it, right? It's not necessarily a specific form factor. It's the attention to detail on how to bring costs out of the manufacturing process or remove processing steps, end quote. Elon contributes to that by saying, quote, and all the way down from the mine to the cell, We're also building a lithium refinery, end quote. Drew Baglino follows up for clarification, once again, quote, in Corpus Christi, end quote. Now there's a lot to chew on there. The first comment would be with regards to the form factor. Now personally, I'm relatively form factor agnostic. Whatever cell achieves the ends that they need, well, that's what I want to see Tesla use. However, my view is the 4680, the reason why they chose that form factor is because it's the best future-proofed of prismatic or cylindrical cells. I don't see pouch cells as a viable option because you have to build structure around this. You're kind of, it's creating double work when you build a battery pack if the cell itself doesn't have a rigid structure. Additionally, when I release my video comparing all the next generation battery packs, it should become apparent that the 4680 form factor is viable for a number of different chemistries, including iron-based chemistries. And that's primarily because, in my view, the Tesla 4680 structural pack has the least drawbacks out of the next generation battery packs. For instance, the CATL Qinglin nickel-based battery pack has the highest energy density, but it also has drawbacks in other areas like potentially safety. So the best all-rounder, in my view, is the Tesla 4680 structural pack, and that's including with an LFP chemistry or iron-based chemistry. But again, more on that in that video, which should come out in about a month. With regards to the lithium refinery, it's great to finally get an update on this. The last time we heard about the lithium refinery was at Battery Day and some rumors that came out just after Battery Day. So this is going to be a lithium hydroxide plant, is my understanding. And as they said, it's going to be in Corpus Christi. The original assumption was that it's going to be near the Giga Austin campus, but Corpus Christi makes a lot more sense because there's a port there. At least that's my understanding. And they'll be able to ship in, thousands and thousands of tons of lithium concentrate to refine that down and then ship it overland to Austin, where they have their cathode factory. When you refine lithium concentrate down to lithium hydroxide, it reduces the volume and weight down by about 20 times. So put it right on the coast, do the refining there, lighten the load, and then ship it overland. Drew goes on to say, quote, on the technical challenges, no ramp is ever easy. Even at the end, when you're 80% to the end, it's still very challenging to get to the end, end quote. Now, I wanted to bring this up specifically because it causes a lot of squabbles online that I can see in the Twitter community, or even between Tesla bears and bulls talking about volume production, but they're not doing an apples-to-apples comparison. What do you mean by volume production? Because volume production after a year, it might be you're 80% ramped, and then it might take you another full year to get from that 80% yield rate up to 95% yield rate. It also doesn't take into account, well, is volume production something that's more relative, like, 85 or 90%, or is it something that's more absolute, like a certain number of gigawatt hours per year or a certain number of vehicles produced? So there's just, before you get into a discussion about whether Tesla has hit a target or not, first you need to have the discussion about, all right, what is our metric and our guidepost here? Elon follows up by saying, quote, I think once we're fully integrated, I think we do still see a path to $70 per kilowatt hour cell before any incentive, end quote. Now, as you recall, earlier in the video, I said that there would be at least a $45 per kilowatt hour tax credit for cells and packs. So that's the cell and the pack combined. Elon's talking about just a cell here, so $70 per kilowatt hour at the cell level. Let's say that's, $90 per kilowatt hour once it's been integrated into the pack. So 45 of 90, you're talking about Tesla's getting half the cost of the battery pack back from this tax credit from the government. Now, from another angle, this is super useful and helpful information to me because we've been dealing with a lot of nebulous estimates as to what Tesla's cell and battery pack costs are. The last time that they really gave us an estimate was back in, about 2018. So it's good to finally get an update about what their expectations are for the future. Now, in the past, I've done videos estimating what I expect Tesla's cell and pack cost would be, 5, 6, 7 years in the future. With this new information, I'm going to have to readjust my baseline. I base those figures off of the publicly available information that I could find. Now, there was other sources that conflicted with that, but now that Tesla has given us a view on what their expectations are, I know which sources to pay attention to in the future, which ones are more accurate. With that said, the most important thing here is actually the not just the dollar per cell and pack cost, but what the relative cost reduction is and how much they're able to reduce the cost of the entire vehicle manufacturing process. The combination of that plus a smaller vehicle will allow Tesla to produce a vehicle that costs 50% as much as their current Model 3 and really accelerate the transition to sustainable energy, which is what Tesla's goal is. Now, clearly, Tesla feels like they're there. They're ready to produce that vehicle that costs $20,000 to manufacture. Who knows what the retail cost will be, probably at least $30,000 base price, and I'll be interested to see if they offer any sort of performance option. Given the fact that it's called a Robotaxi, I don't know what the split is, if they plan on selling all those vehicles or if they plan on keeping a lot of them in their fleet. So there's a lot of questions that remain to be answered, and I don't expect we'll get the answer to those questions until, probably about a year from now. Hopefully sooner, but we'll see. Tesla still has a lot to chew on. Well, that's all for the day. You may have noticed in this video that there was a full cycle of day and night involved there. Well, that's because, it's autumn and everybody decided to chip wood and mow their lawns and ride their motorcycles. It's beautiful weather out here in Ohio. But of course, that gets in the way of me doing my videos, so I really need my own soundproofed room. Regardless, I enjoy doing these videos on the earnings calls, and I'd like to do more videos on the news, but there's just still so much to cover on batteries at a base level. There's a whole lot of technologies that just aren't understood. There's a lot of mistaken assumptions out there, and that's why I continue to focus for the most part on the technology itself. On that note, the 4680 battery cell, U.C. San Diego is currently cycling that and running it through its paces, and hopefully the next video I do will be sharing the results with you. If those results don't come soon enough, then the next video I do will be on the BYD Blade Pack versus the CATL Qilin Pack versus the Tesla structural battery pack. That's all for today. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting me on Patreon with the link at the end of the video, or as a YouTube member. You can find the details in the description. A special thanks to Inku Chris Kong for your generous support of the channel, my YouTube members, and all the other patrons listed in the credits. I appreciate all your support, and thanks for tuning in.